Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Surprise! I'm not Tucker. I'm Ed Henry, in from out of the bullpen. We're broadcasting live from Nats Park, the site of tonight's annual congressional baseball game. The game is going on despite yesterday's attack on GOP lawmakers. The staff of Steve Scalise, the wounded Republican leader, said they believe he wanted them to go forward. We'll be showing you Tucker's exclusive interview with Fred Warmbier, the father of Otto Warmbier, who was obviously detained in North Korea. He's just released in Cincinnati now. Listen to this sound.
We're taking it a moment at a time, a day at a time, and we're going to support each other like we agreed to do all this, and we're adjusting right now. We're adjusting to a different reality.
We'll bring you the rest of Tucker's interview a little later. But first, the game is on, and it's very interesting because despite yesterday's assassination attempt, and that's what it was, on several members of the Republican team, House Majority Whip Steve Scalise remains hospitalized, alive, in critical condition after undergoing his third surgery today. His absence from tonight's game, a sad irony. Scalise was known as one of the speediest players on the GOP squad and his secret weapon as a pinch runner. He scored 4 runs in 7 games over the years. Now for more on tonight's game, Fox's Peter Ducey is down here behind me. And Peter, you and I have been talking and texting one another. We were both very moved by that first pitch. Joe Torre, formerly of the New York Yankees, now representing Major League Baseball, came out with a very special guest.
He did, and that very special guest, Ed, was somebody that no one here in Washington had seen or heard from since yesterday's ambush in Alexandria at the baseball practice, and that was the Capitol Police officer, David Bailey, who was a surprise guest that they brought out and on crutches, and he walked right out to the mound with a baseball in his hand and dropped one crutch and threw a first pitch that made it to home plate. It was a moment that probably just about anybody in here had chills watching. I know that I did. And something else that was very important to see with him out there, he had a big smile on his face. And there was a sustained applause for him. There's obviously a great desire by many of the congressional staffers and other D.C. types that are here to thank the Capitol Police. The first thing that the PA announcer did was ask for a round of applause for the Capitol Police, and then about 20 minutes later, Bailey was out there throwing the ball less than 2 days after he suffered a wound in a gunshot while he was stopping what could have been a horrible, even worse tragedy, again, just across the river at the Potomac. So that would have been probably, so far, the moment of the night, but again, we are just one inning down. Ed.
Peter, you're so right. At a time in this country when law enforcement is oftentimes vilified, to see the officer come out there with Joe Torre, this baseball hero, and see them lock arms and see that pitch and the recovery from this Capitol Police officer. He's still got a long way to go, obviously. But there was another moment. One of our viewers tweeted me that he was moved to tears by this prayer, Democrats and Republicans coming together, Peter.
Right, and there was no big announcement by the public address announcer, just members of the Republican team and the Democratic team a few minutes before they were set to start, all gathered and took a knee for a prayer at second base, which would have been where the Majority Whip Steve Scalise would have been playing tonight. Scalise is still 5 miles away in critical condition at the MedStar Hospital, receiving treatment for, again, his very serious wound to the right hip, and then everything internally that has been affecting him since. The last thing that the Republican team did, though, before they took the field, they were all introduced, and then Steve Scalise was introduced. They put a big picture of him up on the Jumbotron, and everybody from the Republican team that was lined up across the diamond, third base to first base, turned around and they waved at him. And again, that's another bipartisan moment here. They have here the members of the left-leaning party, the Democrats, sitting on left field, and the right-leaning party, the Republicans, are all along the right field line, and everybody stood and cheered. It was the second longest standing ovation tonight. I believe that our producer from Capitol Hill, Chad Pergram, counted it at 42 seconds. But that was a moment that obviously unified everybody that was here. And you want to talk about, people have wondered if what happened yesterday is something that's going to get people to maybe set aside some of the really nasty political rhetoric, something interesting, maybe it's meaningful, maybe it's not. People are really into this game. I've been to these games before the last few years where people just kind of aren't really paying attention. Every single thing that has happened tonight, people are on the edge of their seat, a lot of cheering, a lot of applause, and everybody just seems like they are right on top of what's happening. And it's a close one. It's 3-2. The Democrats are up a run in the second.
All right. It was close. The Republicans are up 2-0. Now the Democrats are up 3-2. I spoke to the Republican House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy before. I asked him who's going to win. He said, America. Maybe that spirit of unity will live on for some time at least. Thanks, Peter Ducey. Yesterday's shooting was committed by a fervent progressive, but the media are trying to label Republicans somehow as the violent ones. Today, the New York Times said there was a, quote, clear link between Sarah Palin's political incitement and the 2011 shooting of Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, a Democrat. One problem, that alleged link between Palin and the attack on Giffords was debunked years ago. The claim is basically fake news, literally fake news. Charles Krauthammer is a writer and columnist. He joins us live now. Charles, what do you make of the New York Times putting out this editorial that, quite frankly, is embarrassing for them years later to still be pushing this false narrative just 24 hours after a former Bernie Sanders supporter tried to assassinate Republican members of Congress?
It's completely egregious. And it's not just that it's been debunked 6 years later. It was debunked within 3 days. I remember writing a column 4 days after the attack in which it was absolutely, totally obvious that the shooter was a paranoid schizophrenic. He had no idea what was going on. There were no ideas in his head. One of his teachers had said that he was living in his own world. And at the time, this is what's most egregious, people don't even remember. The day after the shooting, the Times ran in its news section, on the front page, something it labeled the news analysis that introduced this false idea that Jared Loughner, the shooter, was motivated by this thing on the website that showed the bullseyes for 20 districts. Jared Loughner was not driven to the crime by a climate of hate, because as everybody who knew him and who testified at the time was saying, this man created his own climate. He was a classic paranoid schizophrenic, and that the Times should drag this out 6 years later was amazing. And even the correction was mealy-mouthed and half-hearted. No connection was proved. No connection was possible. The man was a paranoid psychotic.
And Charles, it goes deeper than that, because then the House Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi comes out today when we just heard Peter Ducey reporting on how lawmakers in both parties say, you know what, maybe folks are going to come together. Maybe people are unified. And Nancy Pelosi has a news conference where she attacks Fox News, number one, but number two, she says Republicans have been more responsible than Democrats for this violent rhetoric. Why within 24 hours is she trying to keep score?
Look, this is a reflex. I see it among Democrats. It is true to some extent among Republicans. This sort of the vitriol in our politics is not unilateral. And I think it's when you get the leadership within 1 day of an event like this, and let's remember, she's a Democrat, and the shooter came out and said, are those Republicans or Democrats on the field? This isn't a guy who went out to shoot people. There's a guy who went out to shoot Republican people. If you're a Democrat, you ought to have at least the decency, and a Democratic leader, to wait a while before leveling accusations. I do believe if the leadership were more careful, if they were less ad hominem in their arguments, and as I was saying earlier tonight in Special Report, if they were less apocalyptic in speaking about the other side, the other guys win, it's the end of the republic, the end of the world. You know, if climate change is not, you don't listen to me on climate change, you are a denier, like a Holocaust denier. If that language weren't so extreme, we would have the beginning of a de-escalation, and that's what we need.
Charles, I have 1 minute. The shooter in this case, now dead, also has Facebook posts where he was just disgusting in his attacks. I don't even want to repeat them against President Trump. But you've raised questions before about President Trump, whether he really wants to bring people together or not. Is this an opportunity for him? He gave strong remarks yesterday, the president, about unity at a video here at the game. Is there an opportunity for the president here?
Look, there is, and I think he rose to the occasion in the remarks he made that you showed from the video before. But, you know, he's not blameless. It's not a one-party thing. He was quite aggressive in the campaign. He says he's a fighter, a counterpuncher. He was even aggressive against his Republican colleagues, his Republican opponents. I think this is a time when we can all look back and say neither side here is blameless. Time to do the obvious, to declare a kind of armistice on the vitriol and the apocalyptic rhetoric, and simply say we're a republic, we have a loyal opposition, let's be loyal, let's be civil on both sides. I think it can be done. I don't despair of this. And I think maybe an event like this, perhaps it'll have to be some other event, which would be tragic. But perhaps that can happen.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that the country would appreciate it.
Here, here. You're absolutely right, Charles Krauthammer, that neither side is blameless. Go ahead.
Let me just say, I have been watching the game, and there's a hell of a lot of stealing going on down there. I don't want to cast aspersions, but I keep my eye on
Who's stealing, the Democrats or the Republicans? Who's stealing more?
Equal opportunity stealing, and we got catchers who are somewhat superannuated, if I can be kind.
Well, it's been a difficult 24 hours or so here. Maybe we can have a little bit of levity. We appreciate that. Charles Krauthammer, thanks for joining us. Up ahead, we'll have Tucker's exclusive interview with Fred Warmbier, the father of Otto Warmbier. And we'll continue our live coverage. You can hear the roar of the crowd. Tonight's baseball game. Charles is a big baseball fan. I'm a baseball fan. We'll talk about that, but we'll also talk about the assassination attempt and the real near tragedy there that preceded it. We'll talk to Congressman Jack Bergman. He was an eyewitness to yesterday's shooting.
My business